Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Smith. Welcome to the Lowdown. My special guest, Dean Rogers. Dean, how you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
So, Dean, we're going to talk about something, and you're from the Heartland, and that's what I brought you here today, talk about the Heartland. I think many people don't know what that is, but before we get into that, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you and who you are and what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I am originally from a small town in Southwest Missouri and ended up going to Baylor whenever I graduated from high school, studied accounting and finance, and then spent a few years down in San Antonio working for USAA as part of a financial development program that they had, and then ended up moving up to Austin, transitioning into the private wealth space. And then after a handful of years there, my career sort of randomly brought me out to the West Coast. And then while I was on the West Coast, got introduced to and then ultimately stepped into the role of Chief Investment Officer for a single family office based in Southwest Missouri through a mutual friend of mine working for the O'Reilly family, actually, that's also based in Southwest Missouri. And it was, a really interesting transition because at the time I was still living on the West Coast, but working with a family in the central part of the U.S. and investing into a lot of opportunities, private opportunities largely, that were in the family's own backyard. So we were investing into markets, throughout Missouri into Arkansas, Oklahoma, and not only were they more lucrative from an underwriting perspective, to the extent that it was frankly shocking to me, looking at opportunities like this for the first time relative to, coastal, more metropolitan deal flow. But there was also a really compelling narrative around it that I saw forming, because a lot of these opportunities were supported by a number of different socioeconomic and demographic tailwinds that you weren't necessarily seeing on the coast or throughout the Sun Belt. So we created what is now a Heartland thesis, and that's how we've invested, not just the family's capital, but co-invested with a number of families throughout the central part of the U.S. And we're really excited about it. And I know that we had the pleasure of having you up in Northwest Arkansas. I believe it was in November last year, and you got to see it.
It was in Bentonville.
Yeah, and it's a boom town.
I think I've told you this, and people that ask me how was it, and I said I feel like I was in Leave It to Beaver, but in modern day technology. I'm literally see this police officer walking around, knows all the children in the park, all the families are out there with their kids. And I'm like, wait a second, where do you see this in the United States right now? Yep. And it was quite amazing. It was a very nice place to see. If I had to start a family all over, I'd probably start in Bentonville or somewhere close to that. I mean, that was a great environment.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I tell people it's like Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show meets West Hollywood. You've got, all the really nice restaurants and shops, but then you've also got, you're still, on your drive into town surrounded by, fields and cows, it's charming, but there's also, and more broadly, because we've, frankly borrowed a lot of our own research as it pertains to the Heartland from a group by the name of Heartland Forward, which is a think tank sponsored by the Walton family. And they've actually defined the Heartland as a region, and it's a 19-state region that runs from the Dakotas down through Louisiana. It excludes Texas because Texas is sort of its own thing, and then it goes over along the Gulf Coast to Alabama, up through Tennessee, Kentucky, and then through Ohio, and then everywhere in between. And traditionally, flyover country has been exactly that. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention. It's been relatively hokey and dislocated, and it is what it is, right? And for me, I grew up there and it was normal, but now that I live in Southern California and have done my stint in Austin and all those things, you realize that, the beat of the drum is quite a bit slower, but is certainly speeding up. And so, what Heartland Forward is really passionate about, and really by extension the Walton family, is a lot of those states have lacked, relative economic growth, have lacked proper healthcare, have lacked proper education systems relative to what you see in places like Texas or Florida or California, what have you. And, the Waltons, among other families and even the family that I, have worked with, see the opportunity and want to try to help pioneer an ecosystem that draws talent and jobs and economic activity and frankly fun, entertaining things to do that is akin to what I think you've seen in the Texas Triangle over the last 20 years. And for us, there's a couple markets that we're most focused on, I would say. But really, the whole region we think is relatively compelling, and it's funny because each submarket has its own DNA fabric. And so, if you look somewhere like Northwest Arkansas, you've got Walmart that is based there. You've got J.B. Hunt that's based, in a town nearby, and you also have Tyson, all within a 10, 20-mile radius of one another. And so, Walmart right now just completed a 350-acre, I believe, close to $8 billion project building their new home campus.
Well, I got to see it when I visited you. Beautiful. I mean, that's a big campus, state of the art.
Yeah, it's designed by the same group that did Apple Park in Cupertino.
Okay.
And, that campus is going to, facilitate up to 15, 20,000 employees. And a lot of those folks are being required, at least from my understanding, to move from other regions back to the mothership. And so, with that, the Walton family, as an example, is very keen on trying to make Northwest Arkansas a place where folks that are in their mid-20s and maybe are single or newly married, whatever it may be, make it a fun place. I mean, at this point, Northwest Arkansas is home to the longest continuous run of biking trails in the United States and has actually been designated as the mountain biking capital of the U.S. by the U.S. Olympic Committee. And so there's just a lot of compelling things happening. And, more broadly, I mean, you've got, 60% of all U.S. manufacturing that occurs within the Heartland. You've got 25% of all STEM degrees, 20% of all U.S.-based patents, and over 150 of the Fortune 500 companies within that 19-state region. But it's receiving a fraction of private capital fund flows. And so for us, that was almost the obvious aha moment where it's like, this isn't just convenient because this is where we grew up and what we know best. It's compelling to investors across the globe.
Well, I mean, to your point earlier, I mean, you've seen probably one of the biggest migrations in history since the interstate highway, which has happened. Basically, you've seen people move from New York and California, it could be Texas for whatever reasons, but to Texas, to Florida, to the south, right, south coastal regions. But as and we've seen, I mean, Austin, great place, but I mean, it's getting overcrowded. I mean, Texas is getting pretty built up. Some of Florida is getting overcrowded as well. So you could probably say a lot of the spillover, and perhaps people are also getting kind of tired of what's happening in Texas and stuff. And I think some of the things, working at home and all that lends to the ability to somebody move to a good place to raise their family. But what are some of the other things you're seeing as far as that trend?
Yeah, I mean, so, for example, I am getting married in October of this year, and I believe, thank you, and I believe you will be there, which is great. It's going to be in the Ozarks, the heart of the Heartland.
Yeah, and, looking forward to it.
But we are not wanting to begin our marriage or raise kids in an apartment. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but we want a home, we want a backyard, we want space, we want safety, we want security. We want our kids to be able to go outside and run around, and we want somewhere where we actually have, material economic, or not economic, I should say, but we have appreciation within our homes and our real estate. And I think that putting yourself just personally in an ecosystem that is naturally growing, you are going to rise with the tides.
Absolutely.
And so, that's a conversation that, my fiance and I have had just personally. And I think a lot of folks feel that way. I think that there's also other trends. I mean, I do think that work flexibility, where there's, you can keep your job in Silicon Valley and live wherever you want to. Sure. There's a lot of folks that are going and finding cheaper real estate. I think the fact that, you have so much job creation, there's a very large Boeing facility going in outside of Oklahoma City that's bringing in a lot of jobs. Tulsa has an initiative where if you're a remote worker and, you choose to relocate to Tulsa, you get, I believe it's like a $5,000 or $10,000 one-time stipend, so to speak. There's and beyond that, I mean, you've got, new professional sporting teams coming to places like Kansas City. You've got, the World Cup being hosted, at least in part, in Kansas City in 2026, with part of the Olympics being hosted in Oklahoma City in 2028. You've got these humongous facilities being built by the likes of Walmart. Wow. It's just attracting people. And, if you look at the relative growth, not just in population, but in job creation, I do believe that you're going to see see private capital markets respond to that, likely with a lag. But that's what happened in Texas. And, I believe it started with the jobs and then the people, and then the markets moved shortly thereafter.
No, I mean, back to Governor Bush, Governor Perry, they had an excellent view. Now Governor Abbott, I mean, they had a view. It's like we need to attract the job makers, and they've done a great job doing it. Sounds like, in a sense, what you're seeing. But another thing about the opportunity, as the families you mentioned earlier, there's some sort of control, meaning it's not going to be flooded with a lot of capital or a lot of big projects. There's some things, there's some governors or some roadblocks that are put up in place. I don't know if you could speak to that at all, but
sure.
It makes the opportunity pretty unique as well.
It does, yeah. I mean, so and I an obvious contrast, whenever I lived in Austin, mm-hmm. it was, I would argue in its heyday, this is, 2018, 19, a lot of fun, very busy, just the energy was high. And it's, it seems as though the moment that a lot of the skyscrapers started going up and the markets got flooded with institutional capital, it ended up being more punitive than I think a lot of people realize. And it happens. Markets are not meant to be static. They ebb and they flow. Mm-hmm, and right now, Northwest Arkansas, which which we'll get to there in just a second, like Northwest Arkansas is a phenomenal market, and it's certainly, I believe it's the 15th fastest growing MSA in the United States right now. That won't always be the case, right? Sure. And so there is some level of fluidity to this Heartland thesis. But, one thing that we do really like about Northwest Arkansas is there are families, I will say, that have proactively bought up a lot of the fallow, undeveloped land in the region, almost as a moat or a defense mechanism from the institutional players coming in and flooding, the market with capital. Yeah. And so, for example, one of the projects that we've invested into and that we're excited about that you got to see whenever you were in Bentonville is roughly, there's going to be about 50 to 60 in total luxury townhomes and condos directly adjacent to the new Walmart headquarters. And this was the first instance, at least to my knowledge, where one of these prominent families ended up selling land to a separate third party because they've always been in the business of buying and accumulating and largely self-developing a lot of their own land.
But they agreed to the vision as well, right?
Correct. Yeah. And so there was this implicit blessing upon the developer and the sponsor to, do something that was going to be accretive to the community and what was trying to be built, beyond just, that one insular project. And so, that gave us a lot of confidence to invest because it was the first time that we had seen that particular dynamic take place. Sure. And then you throw on top of that negotiating a 20% preferred return and some share of the GP, it looks, extraordinarily attractive. Yeah. But, it's one of those things. And what I tell people is, we've got another big project going on the Bourbon Trail. Louisville is a market that we love from a tourism perspective. There's really about the same amount of tourism foot traffic on the Bourbon Trail as there is Napa, which is fascinating, right? Yeah,
I would not have guessed that, by the way.
Yeah, and it's some might say that bourbon is a fad or that horse racing is a fad, but the reality is both have been around for a long time, and I think that there is this draw towards an Americana lifestyle or experience that is emerging. And I think that there's sort of a cool patriotic blue collar thing to it where it's like people want to go and they want to put themselves in the central part of the U.S. where there are some deep historical and cultural ties that made this country what it is. And the Bourbon Trail is an example of that. But the thing is, if you go to the Bourbon Trail, unless you're staying in downtown Louisville, which is not necessarily the most pleasant place to stay. It's hard to find a Holiday Inn to even stay at.
Really? Okay.
And so, we're looking at a number of different hospitality projects within the Bourbon Trail. But there's unique drivers within each of these markets. And I think that they each, present their own compelling thesis. And, for us, we, love to find opportunities to co-invest, alongside other families, whether that be, a senior living deal that the O'Reilly family is doing. Sure. We've done a couple of those with them, whether it's something that's coming from the Walton ecosystem or something that's coming out of the Bourbon Trail with, some of the major players up there. If we can, embed ourselves within the family office ecosystem and extract some of those, some of those opportunities and ultimately try to share them with folks that aren't necessarily in those markets, we think it's a great way to diversify. It's a really interesting story to tell. And, what I tell most people is like, if you're curious at all all, you got to go see it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it really is a see it to believe it type thing, and something that,
And you could have told me all about it, but until I actually went and saw it myself, and I'm going to go to your wedding, so I'm sure I'm going to be another part of the Heartland and some of the other places. Now my curiosity is there, but before I didn't really have it. It wasn't on my radar. Now it is.
Totally. And that's where, it's a blessing and a curse. Whenever you're doing business in the central part of the U.S., there are a lot of dislocated markets. It's hard to get to. Information tends to travel a little bit slower, but therein lies the opportunity.
That was the easiest airport I've gotten on and off the plane. That was
you need like
simple.
half an hour max.
That was simple. IAH not the same. We all know that here.
It was so funny. We actually flew into Houston this morning from Bentonville, and we're going to TSA. And Ava, my fiance, is like, "There's no clear here." I'm like, "Believe me, you don't need it." And we were both through security in about 90 seconds. But it really is charming. It's a fun story. And like we were talking about, and I know, and we actually met mutually through the Valerian network, finding folks that you can invest into, especially within private markets where of course it's a great opportunity. There's proper underwriting and due diligence, all those things, but finding projects and opportunities that you can invest into that are unique and present a story and a narrative that you can believe in, and something that's even tangible, right? Where you can go and you can touch the building that you've invested into. For us, there's the human behavioral element.
Purpose in your investing.
Correct, right? Yeah. The S&P 500 is incredibly efficent.
I'm not going to get excited about what I'm investing in.
Yeah, that's not coming up at dinner, right?
Exactly.
And so, we or at least I like to think that we have positioned ourselves to hopefully be a liaison for folks that are curious about the Heartland, to finding opportunities and ways to participate in those markets. And, we're doing it in more ways than one. But it's been really exciting, and it's been a fun calling back home, so to speak, for myself.
Well, Dean, I can tell you what, thank you. Thanks for doing the show. Totally. I did get the visit, so I can tell you seeing is believing, but just your passion for it. That to me, that's a big thing. It's just seeing how passionate you are, and the opportunity is something unique, as we mentioned. And so anyways, thanks for coming to the show. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right.